As we continue to discuss the latest developments with the Roe v. Wade overturning from Friday. Not the happiest topic out there, but the good news is it gives us an excuse to hang out with a very knowledgeable former prosecutor who is now prosecuting the judges themselves, but not with handcuffs and a pistol. He is getting them with ideas. Everyone leave a like, hit the join button, and super chat your thoughts and support. It's James Valliant. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Rucka?
Pretty good. So when it comes to Clarence Thomas's thoughts and opinions, or his opinion, I should say, that he released, I don't have it in front of me. You know, a lot of podcasters, they like to bring like notes. They want to be prepared. I say that's like cheating on a test to bring notes with you,
Well, I've read the opinion. I've read all of the opinions. I've read Thomas's concurrence as well. Mm-hmm. And I want to start out, I'm going to attack him pretty brutally if we continue this discussion. But I want to start out by saying he is the one justice who had the courage, the intellectual integrity, the logical consistency to state out loud what was going on here. That a whole raft of other rights that the Supreme Court has found and enforced under the Due Process Clause are now in jeopardy. Something I said earlier in an ARCUK podcast that I feared before I'd even read his opinion. But the other justices were sort of still hiding. Justice Roberts wanted to find a compromise and not completely overturn the Casey decision, at least completely. And others were insisting, saying, oh, no, this doesn't affect, say, the sexual privacy decisions, gay marriage decision, the birth control decision, whether married couples can engage in oral sex in the privacy of their home, that kind of decision. All of those rights are just as artificial and not in the Constitution, and just as dubious and weakly founded as the conservatives claim abortion was. And of course, they are basic, fundamental rights. Part of our basic, abortion is part of our basic bodily autonomy, the control of our whole lives. But all of these other decisions are as well. They go right to the core of whether we're a free society or not, and whether that freedom is a matter of right or not, and whether or not the majority can reach into our bedrooms, into our bodies, and tell us what to do.
Mm-hmm. So it's virtually everyone these days, it seems, and maybe this has long been the case. They all basically agree that the individual's rights are a little bit ambiguous. Basically, the real question is, should the states or should the federal government get the final say? That seems to be what a lot of political arguments seem to boil down to. So a lot of conservatives have long been saying, or right-wingers have long been saying, hey, we're not banning abortion. We're giving that decision back to the states, just like many other decisions. So, different communities, right? Different groups of people can decide what most of them believe, and they can then have the fair system. So they're basically lowercase d Democrats, ultimately the states' rights people. And then the federal, I guess the people who support the constitutional protection of abortion, in this case, they're in effect more principled, whether or not they understand why they support the right to abortion. At least they're saying there needs to be like a sort of objective view of like what rights are, or the protection of rights, where individual precincts or states can't then violate your rights. Am I basically getting it?
You're it. You nailed it exactly. Conservatives who are so frequently reminding the left that we are not a democracy, that we are a republic, and that's how they defend the Electoral College, the Senate, all the other undemocratic aspects of the wisdom of our founding fathers. The conservatives will point out we're not simply a democracy, and yet they're taking the position here that democracy should control this issue, even though it's a matter of individual liberty. And they restrict liberties as much as possible to as narrow an understanding of the liberties that were articulated in the Constitution. That in itself is a violation of the framers' words and intentions. And they try to ignore the existence of the 14th Amendment, which applied the Bill of Rights against the states, including the 9th Amendment, which commands us to find rights that are not explicitly listed in the Constitution. Justice Thomas and all the other conservatives have said, No, the Ninth Amendment, in effect, may as well not be there. It's wasted ink. May as well just rub those words right out of the Constitution, even though they're in the Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment meant to apply that open-ended understanding of rights against the states, and the conservatives are resisting that here. Yeah, the liberals actually, the dissenters in this case, actually made some good points. I don't agree with their ultimate philosophy, but they made critical points that, this time I'm totally on the left side here. They made very important points about the real world importance of this right.
Every time something like this happens where a sizable segment of the population's values are at stake, I'm sort of trying to be optimistic, hoping maybe this time around Ayn Rand's name is prominent enough to kind of get on people's radars and people start to kind of explore Rand's ideas and relate it to this thing that they're fighting for. In this case, it's abortion. In the past, it might have been fighting socialized medicine or a step towards socialized medicine. Each time around, all we can do is pray, ironically, I'll say as a joke. But okay, and I've heard, I guess, before I ask you about Clarence Thomas's opinion or any of the other opinions released, am I correct that Mike Pence or some other elected Republicans are throwing around the idea of a federal ban on abortion? And if so, then they're not really states' rights people. But have you heard of this or no?
Yeah, I have heard that. Well, of course, this is just the opening. They can say we're sending it back to the states, but this is the beginning of their battle to eliminate all abortion, even from the moment of conception. That's their goal. We should take them seriously when they say that, and they're going to do that at the state and federal level both. Now, I do not think that either side on the federal level has a good standing on this point. Where in the Constitution does it give the federal government the right to regulate things like abortion? Well, modern people will say the Interstate Commerce Clause, but that's a total liberal expansion and, again, an eradication of words from the Constitution. So, in effect, both of them would be arguing for an expansion of state power just to regulate the issue of abortion, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know how consistent with this instant decision either would be. But in either case, you would have to get 60 votes in the Senate to overcome the filibuster that still exists to some extent. And I don't see either side doing that. So I don't see any immediate prospect of either of them getting federal law. So the battle really does go to the states. Now, there are federal issues that I think will be important in upcoming months and years, such as the role of the FDA in approving, say, the abortion pill, and how the federal government can get that across, and get that across, say, on federal jurisdiction. On military bases and national parks, could they have abortion facilities on federal jurisdiction? That, of course, is going to be debated in Congress, and that's an issue they are going to have to resolve one way or another, and that's going to be a knockdown, drag out in the years to come, both in the courts and in Congress. And, of course, in state legislatures all over the country. There are states that want to create subsidized travel for women from states that have regulated abortion to places like California and New York, which have very strong protections for the right of abortion. Those, I think, are really going to be the issues, the scope of the FDA's authority and the ability of the states to push back on that and to keep those abortion pills out of their state. And then on the state level, what the laws are. But this is the beginning for the anti-abortion people. They will not be happy until abortions are restricted as much as possible, until they get all abortions banned all the way back to the moment of conception. That is obviously their goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they could find a way to kind of ban a lot of, not all of them, but like the sort of the intellectual heavyweights driving this whole thing, the way I see it, they ultimately want to eliminate the sex outside of marriage or sex outside of reproductive intention that leads to unplanned pregnancy. So it's even going to go farther back than conception. And speaking of sexual acts, and I was shaking my head with disgust at the thought of married couples having oral sex. No, I'm just joking. But what's Clarence Thomas saying in his opinion? Is he so to be clear, the Supreme Court are not banning anything, but they are lifting the protection of certain things, allowing then states, archaic Republican-run states, to ban people's behavior by private citizens. So what exactly is Clarence Thomas saying that's controversial?
Well, There have been many Supreme Court cases that have enforced what they call a right to privacy. I'm not sure that's the correct intellectual framework to go about protecting these rights, which I do regard as important rights. But say the birth control decision. Back in the 1960s, Connecticut had a law preventing anyone from acquiring the newly released birth control bill. And a married couple wanted it, and they fought to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, even before the abortion decision, said no. Access to birth control is a matter of privacy, and you can't prevent people from obtaining birth control. There have been other decisions since both that Griswold birth control decision and the Roe decision. At first, the Supreme Court upheld things like the Georgia sodomy law. Now, get this. In the early 1980s, the Supreme Court upheld the Georgia sodomy law, and I'm going to be graphic and specific here. The law read as follows. Any contact between the mouth or anus of one person and the genitals of another person is a crime for which you can go to jail. So private consensual activity between adults was regulated. Like I say, even oral sex between married couples was a crime in Georgia, and the Supreme Court in 1982 upheld that.
And it's any contact. It doesn't have to be sexual. You could be reaching for something. Anyway,
right. Well, a friend of mine had a very abusive. He said, "What can I do with my left elbow?"
Sure. Right.
In any event, that was reversed, and only reversed in recent decades, allowing homosexuals sexual privacy, and going so far as even to say that forbidding gay marriage is a violation of equal protection and sexual privacy. Those decisions were all predicated on the same logical foundation that the abortion decision was. Clarence Thomas, as I say, at least had the logical consistency, the integrity in that sense, and the courage in that sense to name what was going on. All of those are on the hook now. Now, because of a change in popular opinion, I don't see a lot of states reinforcing, say, sodomy laws or even birth control laws. So those may never get tested, or at least not anytime soon. What I fear is that the gay marriage decision, for example, there are many states who are itching to remove the right of gay marriage, for example. But if the state is going to offer marriage as a benefit, how can they discriminate on this basis without some religious idea coming into play? So if we do have sexual privacy, and if people are equal, then, and if the state does offer marriage as a benefit to people, it can't deny it to gay people. That's an issue that I think is on the hook. There are all kinds of other issues that may be on the hook. We had the coach praying decision day before yesterday released. I think in general, this court is going to allow a lot more religion into our law. Religion into our law. If you think about abortion, the idea that life begins at conception, the idea that there is a morally significant difference between the sperm and the ovum 1 second before they've come together to create a zygote. There's a difference between the zygote and, say, the ovum. Morally important distinction is a purely religious idea. If you understand the factual basis of individual rights, you understand that there's social conditions for the happiness and success of human beings on Earth. And once you understand that, you realize it's absurd to think of a microscopic entity as having recognizable rights. It's a religious notion. In fact, other religions have a very different take on it. Other religions very much permit abortion, at least before viability, for example. So a particular sectarian religious notion of when life begins is being enforced. In my view, that's a violation of the Establishment Clause. Moreover, it's a violation of the free exercise of religion clause. If someone's religion permits them to have an abortion, this state comes along and says, no, you can't have an abortion in this state, whatever your religion says, because the majority's religious view is that life begins, say, at conception or at a fetal heartbeat. You know, and so I fully expect this Supreme Court to give a green light to all kinds of religious moral legislation as it comes down the pike.
Good Lord. And there's this kind of premise, I think, is there that like people think someone needs to be sacrificed at all times for anyone to benefit. And we see like the economic leftists or the anti-capitalists, they pretend that our prosperity depends upon the exploitation of the third world or of the poor domestically, or someone is someone is suffering for us to prosper. And they sort of like pro-military kind of right-wingers, however you would call them, they repeatedly talk about all the sacrifices that the troops are making for us to be free, as if like continuous liberty depends on continuous suffering and death of soldiers, when in truth, I mean, a good foreign policy would give us the best of all worlds, liberty and peace, and no death, very little death and suffering. So, but this view that constantly someone needs to suffer for someone else to benefit, I think, is what altruism depends on. And when it comes to abortion, I see it as like it can't be that a woman terminating pregnancy one day into her pregnancy is really, it's just an adult making an informed decision to benefit her life. It's like, no. Someone is being murdered for you to pursue your happiness. That's how they want to see it. And we're going to fight for this, murdered, whatever you call it.
Microbe.
Yeah, we're going to fight. We're going to save this oppressed or murdered thing, because
this oppressed microscopic entity, clump of cells. Right.
So altruism is everywhere, and that really is the battle. Bottom line is, it is altruism versus egoism. Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. Conservatives have no problem. They do not bat an eye at enslaving people, at imposing unwanted parenthood on people. I was having an internet discussion just the other day with someone, and I said, well, this seems to me to invoke things like the 13th Amendment against slavery. What you've done is you've enforced, in effect, slavery on mothers. And slavery? How? Well, in case you didn't know, parenthood is hard work. It's 24/7 job that's going to last you, actually your whole life. But until the kid can take care of themselves, you've got a full-time, serious moral responsibility on your hands. And you're thrusting that on people, or you're thrusting on mothers the forced decision to have to give away their babies and not know what the hell is going to happen to them if they throw them out into the adoption system or something else. Utterly irresponsible. Mm-hmm. So they're forcing these kind of horrific decisions, which in my mind amount in effect to involuntary servitude. And conservatives can't see that. Oh, what a blessing it is. A conservative was on Fox News just the other day saying, oh, well, I know lots of people who had unwanted pregnancies, but ended up thinking it was the greatest blessing of their life. Well, what about all those who have unwanted pregnancies only to bring in unwanted babies into this world? And I think the quality of the parenting will very much depend upon whether the parents are all in. As a prosecutor for 18 years, I dealt with too many abused, neglected babies to tell you that that's not a problem, because it's a serious problem. Thousands upon thousands of babies get abused, neglected, newlyborns thrown in trash cans even occasionally. Yeah, and that's the reality that conservatives do not want to face up to. And they think it's perfectly okay to impose this sacrifice, this life of sacrifice, this unchosen burden on a woman for the rest of her life, in effect, or at least for the next 20 years. And they don't bat an eye at it. They don't care.
And the 9 months of pregnancy is an enormous demand to make of anybody. And yes, including the emotional development of growing attached to this baby that'll ultimately be born. And of course, once the baby is born, she's going to love it or feel some kind of emotional attachment. Everybody who doesn't love a baby, right? But I think the anti-abortionists would mock you when they hear you say you're gonna, now she needs to give this baby away, and they would say, if you love babies so much, why are you trying to terminate them? But like we're preventing
born babies who have taken a breath.
Yeah,
are separate entities that have all the rights, in the book. No, right. I do care about babies' lives, lives, independent human entities' lives. And that's the bizarre confusion they have here. Think about it. They're insisting that they're even pre-viable fetuses, which cannot exist outside of it's not as though someone could take care of that pre-viable fetus. No, it cannot exist outside the womb. To claim that it has some kind of natural right to life, a right that nature itself would deny it outside the womb, is absurd. At a minimum, for rights, individual rights to be applicable, you have to be capable, it seems to me, as a minimum, of independent existence outside the womb. They say, well, babies need care too. Yeah, but they can survive with care, the appropriate care, and anyone can give that care. So there is a tremendous moral distinction there that's completely rubbed out by the conservative analysis. And you're right, it's based on altruism. The idea that we're all sacrificial animals, breeding machines for the greater purpose of God. Again, a religious notion they're imposing by law.
Yeah, the person you saw on Fox News who said, like, I know people who had accidental children and they love their children. It's the greatest thing that happened to them. Again, once a baby is born and you've made a decision to carry and to deliver and to raise this baby, then of course now it's a human being and has rights and all of that, and including hopefully people that love it. Hopefully, many unwanted babies are born into a very unhospitable environment and are subjected to enormous abuse or neglect. But look, all of us are alive today because of various decisions, good and bad, made before our time. I mean, that doesn't mean that everything they did was moral and correct. The question is, today, for an adult human to live a good life, what is required? And that is for that adult to have the right to think independently, act independently, and not have his or her rights violated. And that's what the political issue is about.
The founding fathers understood something very profound, that they were articulating big, broad principles, and there were applications that they did not anticipate. That is why they included the Ninth Amendment. They said, do not construe this list of rights as the only freedoms and rights guaranteed to people. And yet that is exactly what conservatives are insisting. They claim fidelity to the Constitution, but they give no effect or meaning to the Ninth Amendment. They give no effect or meaning to the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment. They give no effect or meaning to the purpose of rights, according to our founding fathers. I go back to the Declaration, and it says to me that they're all about the right to pursue happiness. Rights, they understood, are the social conditions, the factual preconditions for an individual to have success and happiness in this world. The point of rights is for individuals to lead a happy life if they can. And that is exactly what conservatives are opposed to. The founding animating principle of our government, the revolutionary secularization of government, the first government without a religious basis in human history. So the radical secularization of government was a revolutionary thing about our country. And conservatives are hell-bent on undoing the spirit and the letter of the Constitution.
Yeah, and as Ayn Rand points out in one of her interviews, after millennia of religious warfare, you have Catholics, Protestants, Jews, and everyone else, new religions popping up in America, all living side by side, and the atheists as well. And the separation of church and state is, what we can really thank for that. And recently there was some prayer being conducted at a high school football game, was it? You were telling me before the show. Can you tell us about that?
This has been a blockbuster year for the Supreme Court. Boy, they issued some important decisions. Another decision that they released just a couple of days ago was, at long last, it's a case that's been going on for years. A public school employee, a football coach, was doing prayers after football games out on the field in a visible way. And there was an atheist student there who felt uncomfortable. He thought that if I didn't join in coach's prayer, I wouldn't get so much playtime on the field. And so there's a case. And under the law that's as old as I am, the Lemon Test, they had because the Establishment Clause, you see, creates public education creates an inherent problem. The minute you have compulsory tax-supported education, somebody's rights are going to be violated. Because if you don't teach religion, if you do teach religion, if you teach intelligent design in biology, or you don't teach intelligent design and you just teach natural selection, values are inescapable in education, and somebody's values are going to be violated when public education has to make these decisions. So, but the law, for at least as long as I've been alive, is that tax-paid school employees at public compulsory schools cannot engage in a visible religious practice in front of their students or as part of their job. The court has effectively destroyed the Lemon Test, thrown that out the window, saying that the coach, the taxpayer's employee, there with kids that are compulsorily there under his tutelage, His religious freedom and freedom of speech is more important than the Establishment Clause, which prevents government from enforcing a certain religious view on people. Totally reversing, as I say, almost 60 years, I think, of Supreme Court precedent. Now, what the test is now, I'm not sure. I read the case and I'm not sure they articulated a test. So there's going to be all kinds of new litigation on where public employees can be religious and demonstrate their religion on the taxpayer dime. Again, you see, religious values, at least on the local level, are going to be protected by this new conservative Supreme Court.
And of course, the concept of public property is would we call that an anti-concept? It's an invalid it's a contradiction. Public and property are opposites, right? Like, so there should be no public property. I suppose maybe a courthouse can be, let's say, not owned, or even that could be leased, whatever. The point is, every property should all be private, as property implies, and we wouldn't have to argue about which school is teaching what. And you hear some, conservatives express their outrage at the public school system, and you start to get excited, like, "Oh, are they going to ban public schools?" And they go, "Yeah, maybe we should." They're suggesting, abolish the Federal Board of Education, and you get excited, and then they go, "So we can have the states provide public education." Oh, great, that's what I need, right? So we can't. So then, instead of having, let's say, sexually freaky teachers, we'll have teachers who think, sodomites are going to hell. Like that's what we need. We need private education. We need private property, and we need capitalism and all of that. So it's a frustrating time to live, isn't it?
It is, very much so. And we've sure got our work cut out for us as defenders of individual liberty. Neither side understand. The left wants to read the government as having open-ended powers, even though it's clear that the Constitution limits the powers of government. Specifically, and the framers were afraid that if they listed the rights, people would think that the powers of government are limitless. Well, that is exactly the error that the left has fallen into. And of course, the framers' other great fear was that if they listed these rights, then those are the only rights that would be recognized. And that's exactly what the conservatives are doing. People like Clarence Thomas are doing precisely what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson most feared.
Yeah. The journey of the conservative movement, or the right wingers, is pretty horrific to watch in recent years. You have elements of that side of town that are explicitly opposed to the founding principles. They think any sort of kind of semblance of individual rights being inalienable is a failed theory. They see it. They say, "Oh, the leftists, they take advantage of us when we're principled. We need to be more collectivist than them, even in a sense, and just impose community values and all that." It's a bad time all around. But speaking of the battle, we've got some super chats. Robert with $5 says, leaves one wondering whether Justice Thomas will eventually fall on the sword of Loving versus Virginia. Do you know what he's referring to?
Yes, he is. The Loving case is the very important Supreme Court case which declared misogyny laws unconstitutional. Many states, most of them in the South, had, but not just in the South, but many states, mostly in the South, had laws that prevented interracial marriage. And it was only, again, it's only a little older than I am, but the Supreme Court has said, no, that's a violation of equal protection. Now, it's true that it's a totally different basis. The conservatives might jump back at you and say, well, no, this is a substantive due process case, not an equal protection case. On equal protection analysis, misogyny laws against interracial marriage violate the Equal Protection Clause. And we haven't said anything about the Equal Protection Clause yet, but they have, in principle, stepped down the road of narrowly reading the rights in the 14th Amendment. They have stepped down the road of backing away from the decisions of my lifetime that have enforced liberty rights against the states, which was the whole idea of the 14th Amendment. The sad thing is that the original Bill of Rights was designed only to limit the federal government. And they had some limitations on states, but only a few. I mean, states could do slavery until the Civil War. But after the Civil War, when we passed the Slavery 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, now the 14th Amendment is a powerful thing because it gave to federal courts the jurisdiction to strike down state laws that violated the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights includes the Ninth Amendment. And the framers of the 14th Amendment, if you read the debates, they believed that the 14th Amendment protected an open-ended category of unnamed rights, just like the Ninth Amendment does. When it comes to the framers gave us the instruction manual, the 9th, 10th, and 14th Amendments on how to read the document. Read the freedoms and rights of individuals broadly. In fact, we haven't even named all the liberties individuals have, and you have to enforce liberties that we haven't mentioned. On the other hand, read the powers that we grant to government very narrowly and specifically, and the procedures under which that power can be exercised narrowly. That's the clear message of the 10th Amendment. And rather than taking the instruction manual from the framers, the 9th and 10th Amendments, neither side, neither the left nor the right, they each are committing, as I say, one of the two great errors that the framers most feared. We're living in the framers' nightmare.
Yeah. God help us all. Roland with 199 euros says, hope this will help defeat the ... Right. Because I often say tongue in cheek, help us beat the left by sending your super chats. Since that is a very effective business model on the internet, send us money to beat the left. We actually have a non-super chat I want to read by Be Catholic or Be Lost. Life begins at conception and babies must be cleansed of their original sin by baptism to be saved. And then there's a John 3:5 quote or source. And then contraception is intrinsically evil. The state and the church must unite. So not all anti-abortionists are quite hold that exact view, but I think a lot of it is coming from
spitting in the face of the founding fathers, ripping up the Constitution. Anyone who says anything like that is a statist, authoritarian, is someone advocating theocracy, and someone who has scratched out nearly the entire text of the Constitution. Anyone who could have that opinion has no understanding of a single word of our founding documents, has no understanding of the intention of the framers of either the Bill of Rights or the 14th Amendment, and they are hostile to the entire conception of American government, what made America so revolutionary. And in fact, the most moral country that had ever existed in history was precisely the eradication of sectarian religion from our law. And the only moral thing to do would be to, look, any law that requires a religious justification is pernicious by that fact. If the government, for example, tried to enforce Shabbat or a kosher diet by law, that would clearly be a violation of the First Amendment, wouldn't it? My free exercise of religion and the establishment of a state religion. Well, I would say this is true about any law that requires a religious justification, sir. If your law cannot be justified on a perfectly secular basis, it is out by that simple reason alone.
Yeah, and maybe Be Catholic or Be Lost already left the stream, so won't actually hear that response. Chances are they just comment that on every live stream that has to do with this topic. But the fact that they would say babies must be cleansed of their original sin by baptism to be saved. So that's why you need to save this fetus or whatever comes before a fetus. That's why you need to save and carry this being to term in order so it can then be saved and cleansed of its original sin. That's your view of human nature. That's what your view of humanity. We're all inherently guilty and despicably wicked. But you're going to fight for our lives. You're going to sacrifice the living for the unborn because God wants them to be dipped in water, dunked in water for a moment when they're infants.
Mysticism and altruism are the basis here. And I do want to thank that poster, that questioner, for one thing. He points out that this is necessarily a sectarian religious view, and a sectarian religious view that he wants imposed on everyone, regardless of their views on religion.
And then Bonnie with $2 says, for Razi's travel, I'm trying to lighten up. Well, this is no time to be light. I'm joking. Thank you for that, Bonnie. And we're flying Razi first class with your $2. Anything else in the opinions release, either of Thomas or of any of the others that we didn't get to?
As I say, the thing that really the most disturbing thing was the majority opinion that the 5 hardcore conservatives joined in totally overturning it. He based it on tradition and history. He cited medieval history. He's actually going to, again, failing to recognize the revolutionary thing that was the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The founding of the United States was a total violation of tradition. There had never been a secular government before, one whose moral legitimacy was based on individual rights and freedom. No. So the framers are turning literally back to medieval religion as legal precedent and guide. I find that utterly horrifying. I think that'll be my last word on this.
Yeah. So people still won't go with individualism, right? So many people, they still make arguments on utilitarian grounds. How do we want to craft society? What will bring about the greatest amount of life or the greatest amount of net benefit? What will limit the most amount of problems? That's how a lot of these arguments take place, which is why so many conservatives, they won't argue really for individual rights. They say give the power back to the states so that the smaller communities can decide what type of society they want. And that is, that is not the way. That ain't it, as they would say in the streets. All right. Well, no other super chats. A lot of vibrant discussion in the chat. Thank you all for watching. I guess we can call it a wrap. No upcoming shows today, but tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time, it's the Thursday Collective on Do Animals Have Rights? That'll be a little bit controversial as well, I suppose. All right. Thanks, James. Well, I guess if we can go out on an optimistic note, there are objectivists in the universities. There's the Ayn Rand University, which is pumping out very bona fide intellectuals. And change is going to happen as it happens. It's not necessarily all going to be televised. We're not going to see it happening in real time. But then maybe one day we'll just look around and say, "Wow, better ideas are in the culture. How did this happen?" And maybe it will happen dramatically. Maybe the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or some other titan is going to pass through an objectivist course and training and decide, I want to really, really change this world in a major way. So be optimistic, folks. Pursue the good life in the meantime. And, no matter where you stand on this issue, practice safe sex. I think we can all agree on that. Well,
yes,
most.
Definitely practice safe sex. All the more important today.
All right. No other shows today. Thank you, James. And see you all back here tomorrow for the Daily Objective. And goodbye.
Take care.